Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, if the Timberwolves are worse this year, if they regress as a team, what happened? I'll tell you what would have to happen for Minnesota to be worse this season. It's all upcoming next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic Labor Day weekend here in the U.S. We are ever closer to basketball. And today, I want to do the flip side of something we did about a week ago, which was why the Wolves could make a, quote, major leap next season. We talked about that last week. It was spurred on by the ESPN forecast series where there were some voters who thought the Wolves could make a leap. Later in the week, we talked about the disbelief of some voters. Nobody at ESPN thought the Wolves would win the finals this year. Today, I want to do the flip of the major leap argument. So if Minnesota has a bad season, if they don't play better, if they don't win more than the 49 games they won last year, and I'm talking about the regular season, not necessarily, I think this is a different conversation than why they can or can't win the finals. This is just from a regular season standpoint and an overall body work standpoint for the season. If Minnesota is not better than they were last year, what happened? What are the most likely pitfalls of this season's team? We're going to break all that down here on the show today. First, though, a big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So, again, I want to be clear about the distinction here. So, if Minnesota... I think that this conversation that we're having today about why, if the team's not better, why? I'm not saying they won't be better. I want to be very clear about that. I don't think I can say that enough or more clearly. But if we look up in mid-April and this team won 47 games or even 49 games again and isn't better, maybe that's a better way to say it, what took place this season? Barring injury, of course. And I'll talk a little bit about roster depth because I do think that matters. Like last season, the Wolves had some pretty significant injuries to key players. Obviously, thankfully, not Anthony Edwards, but, Julius Randle missing a month and Dante DiVincenzo missing a month and Gobert missing nearly a month. And all those kind of overlapped a little bit in the middle part of the season, just before and during and around the All-Star break. So, but everyone was healthy for the playoffs. And of course, that is in part why this team was able to get to the conference finals. And, so we will talk a little bit about depth because are they able to withstand periods of time where there are significant injuries? I think that's part of this conversation, but I really want to focus on what's the most likely, where's this thing most likely to go wrong if it does go wrong? And I'm not saying it will. So, I want to start with the non-Ant related stuff. Because I don't know. We could certainly say, my argument for why the Wolves could win the finals last week was, look, if Ant makes a leap, he's been, the sixth in all NBA voting each of the last 2 years, which implies that the folks voting on those awards think Ant is essentially the sixth best player in the NBA. I think he's without question a top 10 player, probably a top 6 or 7 player, no matter who you ask, for the most part. So could he make the leap from superstar to super duper star, right? To that top 3 where you're talking SGA and Jokic and depending on the year, Giannis or whomever else. Can he make that leap? Now that I think is the question about whether or not they win the finals. I don't necessarily think that's the question of it. It certainly would contribute, but that's not why they're going to win 49 versus 55 games. There's so many other factors. And I want to start with the most obvious places this could go wrong. And my number one is actually Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert last season clearly started something of a decline, at least in terms of his impact. And maybe he bounces back this year and then, reports of his demise would have been greatly exaggerated. The report I'm giving right now, I'm not saying he went off a cliff last year because he didn't. He was still extremely impactful. We'll be making the case this week. I don't want to spoil the preview I got of the Locked On NBA top 100 list, but he's a little lower than I had him certainly on my list. And people are kind of starting to think, all right, Rudy's now what, 32. He's on the wrong side of everything. Well, that's true. His performance didn't fall off a cliff last year, though. He was still the anchor of a top 6-7 defense in the NBA, just a year removed from another Defensive Player of the Year award and the league's best defense in 23-24. And Mike, that doesn't mean, though, that there isn't some concern that this thing could change rapidly this year. I don't think it will. I think he'll still be very impactful, and I think he'll probably have a pretty similar year to last year. But if there's all of a sudden this rapid decline from Rudy Gobert, the Wolves defense could be in trouble. I mean, you say goodbye to Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You're going to backfill those minutes with some combination of young players. We'll talk about that later because that's certainly part of this conversation. But there's not a whole lot of big man depth in terms of defenders that you trust. Julius Randle's fine, depending on the matchup. He's not a rim protector. He's a good rebounder pound for pound, but he's not as impactful to the Wolves' success on the glass as Rudy Gobert is. And Naz Reid is the weakest defender of the three, but he's maybe the most versatile well, I don't want to say that. He can rim protect better than Julius Randle. He can also get out and guard on the perimeter better against, rangier perimeter guys, certainly than Rudy, but also better than Julius Randle. So I think all that say, they don't have another guy they could trust in the archetype of Rudy Gobert. We saw that last year when Rudy was out and Luka Garza was forced to play extended minutes, and it was certainly a mixed bag. And there were some games where they just said, screw it, we'll play small. Well, Jean Beringer, this year's first-round pick, is eventually going to fill that role. At least that's the plan. But there's nobody else. Like Jesse Edwards is gone now. Not that he was going to play rotation minutes, but there's no other bigs there. And so if Gobert, and we saw that last year again, when Gobert was out with injury in the February-ish timeframe, if Gobert falls off a cliff, if his performance, I should say, falls off a cliff this year, this team could be in trouble from a defensive standpoint, or will be in trouble from a defensive standpoint. Things become a lot more difficult. And if the rebounding continues to fall, it was a precipitous decline last year on the defensive glass for Rudy. It was the lowest defensive rebound mark of his career. If that continues, if we see him continue to be a half step slow when, protecting the weak side, or half step slow when coming out on the perimeter, being asked to guard out there, which he was asked to do a lot more last year. And I thought he did an admirable job, but he's still a 7'1" guy getting older who already was a little bit, better than most 7-footers by far in space, which is one of the reasons he won a Defensive Player of the Year, 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. And people love to clown Rudy, and I've talked about this plenty of times, but find me a 7'1" guy that's not, Wemby, who's obviously taller than 7'1". You count on one hand the number of 7-foot guys who have guarded as well as Rudy and switches on the perimeter over the past, I don't know, forever, right? Like, we could play around with 7-foot Kevin Durant, Kevin Garnett, like guys like that, right? But actual centers, like functionally centers who guarded on the perimeter and switched as well as Rudy Gobert has. But if that changes, then the Wolves have to adjust what they're doing defensively from a scheme standpoint, and it's a domino effect. And it's in part why Minnesota started to prepare for life post-Gobert by drafting Beringer, a fellow Frenchman who's obviously painfully young. He'll be 19 this year and far too young to play rotation minutes and far too raw from just an experience and minute standpoint as a professional, period, much less a rookie in the NBA, to actually play rotation minutes. But hopefully not next year, maybe the year after. Like, Gobert's got 2 years in a player option left, so he's likely here for 3 more years. But Beringer is going to have to start playing some rotation minutes over the next 2 seasons and give himself a shot to play. And if Gobert starts to decline this year, well, Beringer is not ready. And the whole thing changes if Gobert's not playing to his what he has done for the majority of his career. Again, I'm not saying this will happen, but it's within the realm of possibility that Rudy Gobert continues to decline and it becomes more obvious this season. And that, hurts the Wolves' floor, right? And Gobert's the ultimate floor raiser. I've talked about this many times before. And he's a big part of why this team should be a shoo-in to win super high 40s, 48, 49 plus wins, like barring catastrophic injury. That should be the floor of this team with much greater upside. I want to talk about some other factors that could play into this, some of the more obvious ones in terms of rotation pieces that have shifted around, and then a couple of other items as well as we evaluate if this team's not better next year or this season, why would that be the case? We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Monarch Money. Most people cannot name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I mean, it's amazing. You can tell maybe you're not saving as much as you thought you were. Monarch can help you find what your inefficient investment allocations might be and also discover forgotten 401ks. Maybe you have a past job, you left a job in the last year, and you forgot you had a 401k. Monarch Money can help you with all of that. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNBA. All right. Couple other notes here in terms of rotation pieces that we need to worry about before we get to the Anthony Edwards stuff. We got to talk about Mike Conley. Similar conversation as Rudy Gobert, although last year he already kind of took that step back where Minnesota was like, all right, and he started to show it right in the playoffs, especially against the second round win over Denver a year plus ago in summer of 24, right? They beat Denver in the second round, started to show some, all right, Mike's slowing down a little bit, really saw it in the Mavs conference finals series a little over a year ago, and then throughout last season. And I think the way that season ended, not last season, but the year before, wasn't certainly in part why Minnesota traded up to draft Rob Dillingham at number 8 in that trade with the Spurs, because they said, look, we don't know how long this thing's going to last with Mike. And then last year we saw more of it. And through the first 4 months of the season, Mike Conley was the worst 2-point percentage guy in the NBA, like the worst 2-point shooter in the NBA. And the 3-point shot wasn't a whole lot better. It was really, really rough. He was obviously piping hot the second part of the year, finished, right in line with where we'd expect him to be in the 41% range. The defense continued to take a step back, and teams were completely just playing him to shoot, not worried at all about him driving. They knew he wasn't going to try and drive and score, and when he wasn't converting. He got a little better as the year went on, and I think there's something to him playing himself into shape, whatever the case, however you want to say that, for a guy who's, in his late 30s. Not that he wasn't in shape at the start of the year. I mean, I don't mean actual shape, it wasn't in great physical shape, but I mean being sharper on the floor. And at the same time, it's this weird kind of needle to thread because you want to make sure you're not overplaying Mike to save him for the playoffs. And Chris Finch has talked about that a lot too. So I think it's pretty likely that he begins to get phased out over the first part of the season, but he can't be unplayable. That's what I'm worried about. So this isn't just Mike Conley continuing to regress. I'm worried about, not regress, decline. I would be concerned about with Gobert. We already talked about in the first segment today. This is Conley cannot be unplayable. He has to still be a rotation guy, even if he's not starting come Christmas, even if he's playing, just a handful of rotation minutes here and there. He's a nominal starter where he starts and plays 6 minutes at the start of each half, and then he sits. They got to get something from Mike Conley. He's got to knock down open threes. He has to be still a solid team defender because this team does not have the depth in the backcourt to be able to withstand him not being playable. I mean, and this is one of the reasons why Minnesota is certainly in the mix to still add Malcolm Brogdon. They're rumored to have interest in Malik Beasley. We've talked about this quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, because what happens if you don't do that? Say you just bring in Bones Highland and Mike Conley becomes unplayable. Now what do? You got to lean on Rob Dillingham, and that's a scary prospect because we don't know what that's going to look like, and we know Chris Finch doesn't want to do it unless he has to. He may have to in that scenario. Is it going to be then Bones Highland and Rob Dillingham? Is it going to be Dante DiVincenzo starting as a full-time point guard, which then weakens your bench and plays Dante a little bit out of position? I know he could do it, but your best case is Dante's a secondary playmaker, catch and shoot guy. He's not operating the offense. It completely upsets everything if he's not playable. So I would chalk that up under the things to look out for, because that would be a pretty dramatic. And again, it's why Minnesota has interest in the likes of Brogdon, in the likes of, obviously Malik Beasley's not a point guard, but that's just further playable rotational backcourt depth, which then makes it more palatable if Dante has to play point guard, right? Or if Ant has to function on the ball more often than you'd like him to, then you at least have Malik Beasley off the ball who can knock down threes at a catch and shoot clip as good as anybody in the league. then the trickle down effect. It becomes palatable if you've got another rotation guard, and we just don't know what Rob Dillingham is in that spot. Or Jalen Clark's obviously a very different player and is functional and can help you, but he's not going to really help you offensively, and you certainly aren't going to have him run your offense. So Conley has to be playable. Let's talk about Ant now, because I'd probably rank it somewhere after the Gobert and Conley thing. I'd probably rank the Ant thing here. If Ant continues to be like he made some incremental improvements from 2 years ago to last year in terms of the overall body of work. Obviously, the 3-point shooting went through the roof. It was awesome. It was fantastic. The defense was a little bit worse, and he got to the line a little bit less. And certainly the first part of the year. So overall, like the net results from last season for Ant were better. I know the team was worse in the regular season. I think injuries and acclimating Randle and DiVincenzo and losing Cat obviously was the biggest reason there. And they went just as far in the playoffs, even though they flamed out in similar fashion to what they did against Dallas, which obviously Dallas from 2 years ago is inferior to last year's Thunder team, of course. But I do think if Ant continues to incrementally improve, which he did last season, again, body of work was an incremental improvement, then this team is probably in a similar place. If they are going to make a leap to a 55-plus win team, I say that they won 56 2 years ago. If they're going to, threaten the 60-win mark or whatever, threaten the 1 seed in the West, which is going to be extremely tough with OKC and others hanging around in the Western Conference. But if they're going to do that, Ant has to take the leap. I think they can still be a better team than last year, even if Ant only incrementally improves and is still like the 5th or 6th best player in the NBA. That would obviously be disappointing because he has the talent to be the best player in the NBA. He certainly does. They could still be a 53, 54, 55 win team, even if Ant is the same guy he was last year. I think enough things went wrong. We talked about the late game bad luck, the close game bad luck overall, being 4 or 5 games worse than their Pythagorean win-loss. Their point differential suggested they should have been last year. That indicates bad luck, and there was a lot of it. The injury luck was a little bit inopportune. I know there's certainly teams that had it worse, but you factor all those things in and you assume some natural improvement from guys like Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid, et cetera, who we haven't even talked about today because we kind of know what we're going to get from them. This team should be better than 49 wins. So I think there'll be some natural improvement, even if Ant doesn't make the leap. The question about Ant making the leap is that could protect you from some continued bad luck. It could protect you from some bad injury luck. It could also vault you, if everything else goes well, to a 60-plus win team, like what SGA did over the last couple of years with OKC. And certainly there's other factors there. You look at the each roster in their entirety, fine. But the point is, as a superstar, if Ant does make this leap, then it protects you against all the other stuff. And it makes it that much more likely that you're going to see a better season instead of a worse season, right? Protecting yourself against that regression that otherwise may seem inevitable. So the Anthony Edwards leap, I think, is a big piece of this. But I think this team could get better without Ant making a leap, just for all the reasons I cited. And, when you look at the luck and the other guys and overall natural progression as well. But if Ant makes the leap, then look out. I think that's a pretty interesting thing to consider as well. I want to talk about the young players, the fringe of the rotation, some of the other things that have to go at least, to a point well, if this team is going to be better than last year's 49-win regular season total. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here. It starts in 2 days, Thursday night. Get ready. Cowboys, Eagles, I believe. FanDuel's making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel makes every game more exciting, especially when there's one game that's always my favorite, like one primetime NFL game. You can put all your chips in, figuratively speaking, when you're looking at that game on FanDuel. You can look at the win total. You can look at, obviously, the over-under, the line, and also live betting throughout. You can also keep an eye on your fantasy lineup. Use FanDuel and follow along there, all the stuff, the live betting, et cetera. It's a ton of fun. So are you ready to play starting this Thursday with the NFL season? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Neglected to mention this earlier, but I do want to mention this important request related to the listener survey that we've been doing here at Locked On over the last couple of weeks. Locked On wants to hear from you. We put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. It's your chance to tell us what you like and what you don't like, and also answer questions about our advertising. You can go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes the survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the QR on your screen or the URL right there. And if you're listening, you can find the link to lockedonpodcast.com/survey. The link is also in the show notes. Thank you. Big thank you for helping us out with our listener survey. All right. Closing out today by talking about some of the different role player performances that the Timberwolves are obviously going to lean on. And the reason why I ranked this last, like the easy thing, if you look at this and be like, well, they got to figure out the Nikhil role. Yeah, that's true. But we're also talking about one of like 3 to 4 bench roles, right? So the top 7 are the same. Like as valuable as Nikhil was, and I want to be very clear, I'm not ripping on Nikhil Alexander-Walker. He was a vital piece of what Minnesota did the last couple of years. But in the grand scheme of things, you have 5 starters, you have 3 bench guys in the rotation, and Nikhil Alexander-Walker wasn't a starter, and he wasn't the 6th man, and he wasn't the 7th man, right? He was the 8th guy. Now, he was important. He had to start when Conley couldn't play. He played heavy minutes at times when Conley played less. He played a lot more when Donte DiVincenzo was out. Like the depth matters, right? But if this team's healthy and Mike Conley doesn't become unplayable, like the Nikhil role is less important than every other role that is returning for Minnesota, which is why it's still on this list. It's still important, but it's not number 1. That's why it's in the 3rd segment here, because I'm most worried about the Rudy thing. I'm worried about the Conley thing, and I'm worried about, if Ant doesn't make a leap. This is still in the conversation, but it's not the headliner. Because if Terrence Shannon Jr., and I've said this before, if TJ Shannon is 70% of what Nikhil was able to do defensively, but he's 130% of what he does offensively, then it's the same thing. It all comes out in the wash. Very likely. Right? Like if he's not quite as good on defense, which I don't think he will be, he won't be, almost certainly, but there's certainly upside there. And on offense, I think he provides more. He's got, he's maybe not accuracy-wise as good of a three-point shooter, but the upside is there. We know he's a volume shooter with good range. We know that he can attack off the dribble. He's an absolute terror in transition. And we've seen him score a little bit more off the dribble than we expected him to, at least than I expected him to do based on what he did at Illinois. A lot of that was in transition or it was three-point shooting. It wasn't as much creating in the half court off the dribble. We've seen him do a little bit of that at the NBA level. We saw him do it in the playoffs in his brief stint in the rotation against OKC. So I think it's important, but I think TJ Shannon and then Jalen Clark defensively and Rob Dillingham when he gets a chance on offense, those guys are going to be able to at least hold their own on the offensive end of the floor. And ultimately together, the three of them, this three-headed monster that frankly, like Chris Finch said at the end of last season, or maybe it was before Summer League or something, it might have actually been, I think, exit interviews time frame. So right after the Wolves were eliminated in June, talked about how he thinks he's going to have to go to more than an 8-man rotation. Well, yeah, I think they're going to ultimately fill the Nikhil spot with a combination of 3 guys and probably 2 guys most nights, right? They'll probably play 9 guys and one of Jalen Clark, probably Jalen Clark and Rob Dillingham. One of the 2 of them won't play on any given night. But depending on the matchup, depending on who's playing well, depending on who's had a good week at practice or whatever early in the season, a good preseason, that's how you're going to see this rotation take shape. It's going to be 9 guys instead of 8 this year. It's going to be 2 guys, potentially 3, filling the Nikhil role. And well, it's important, again, and it becomes more important, of course, if some of the other stuff happens, right? Like if Mike Conley does become unplayable, then this is vital. Then you need 2 of the 3 of those guys to be like legit rotation guys. And somebody's got to backfill. If Donte becomes a starter, someone's got to play the DiVincenzo role. Rob Dillingham has to come to the party. Maybe he becomes a starter. Like all those things, which is why the Conley thing was earlier in the show, because that happens first. If that's an issue, then it's the domino effect. It's the trickle down. Then everything else matters that much more. And all of the above regarding Shannon and Dillingham and Clark really, really, really matters. And also, so does this last roster spot, technically too, but the last roster spot they're likely to fill, like that could ultimately, it shouldn't matter on a team with designs and going to the finals and winning the finals, but it will matter if some of these other issues crop up for Minnesota. So that's the order I would rank these potential problems in. Again, if this team's not better, working backwards from that assumption, say, again, look up in April, this team won 47 games. Why? Number 1, it's because Rudy Gobert had a massive decline. Number two, it's because Mike Conley became completely and utterly unplayable for whatever reason. Number three, it's because Anthony Edwards didn't make an obvious leap this year, and he only, had micro improvements, and the overall body of work wasn't necessarily significantly better than last season. And number four would be the young players at the end of the rotation don't show up. Dillingham's not ready. Shannon's inconsistent. Jalen Clark has no offense to speak of. The 40% last year from three on 85 attempts or whatever it was isn't real, right? Like those things are what I mean when I say the young players didn't show up and do what they need to do. I do think it's far more likely, as I said on a couple of different shows last week, Minnesota will be better this year than last year. I think they'll win more than 49 games. I'm taking the over on 50.5 wins. But if things go south, what will have happened to allow that to happen? Okay. Later this week, we're going to talk Locked On NBA Top 100. The list comes out, I believe, tomorrow. So depending on when it comes out, perhaps we'll talk about it on Wednesday's show. Worst case, we'll talk about it Friday's show. And, break down that top 100. I'll give you where I ranked Wolves players and actually some other guys. I'll give you like my list compared to the overall list that the host voted on. What were the biggest discrepancies? I always think that's fascinating. And I don't know because I haven't seen I haven't compared the two. I saw a sneak preview of like where a couple of Wolves players are, but I haven't gone through them and like, all right, I ranked this guy 5 and somebody else ranked him 12. Why is that? Right. So that's something we'll do later this week, and I'll make the case and admit where I may have been wrong, and also, just probably argue against what some of my colleagues said. So we'll do all that later in the week. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, for your second listen, go check out the Locked On NBA podcast. Our guys Doug, Matt, and Hayes do an awesome job throughout the offseason, keeping you up to date on all things NBA. You can find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is also part of the very same Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, we're also your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.